There is an unsung hero out there who might just be ready to be the Jalen Bridges replacement for the Bears. This is Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you by FanDuel. I'm your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas. Happy birthday to the great Steve Yzerman, and thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. We can kind of run the gamut here with today's program. We're talking basketball, transfer portal, and a guy who could be an ideal replacement for a departing star. We will also look at a little bit at football and who this Baylor quarterback, potential starting quarterback, is drawing comparisons to. And speaking of football, could some of our neighbors in Texas be in a completely different league from Baylor? And what would that mean for Baylor going forward? That is going to ruffle some feathers. That is for sure. That's all coming up on today's program. We start with basketball, and we have it on good accord. And by that, I mean, heard it from Matt Mosley on the Matt Mosley Show, of which I am on weekdays 3 to 6 on ESPN Central Texas, that there might well be a Jalen Bridges replacement touring seeing Baylor's facilities right now. And of course, I am talking about Jalen Celestine, who we probably haven't heard of, but that's okay. He is coming in as technically a grad, actually probably not technically a grad transfer. Played 4 years with a medical redshirt in there at Cal. He is a wing guy. He stands at 6'6", 6'7", depending on who you believe, and up to 215 pounds. Be solid guy when you see the highlights. But he comes in as a guy who can absolutely replicate the shooting that Jalen Bridges was able to have the last 2 years, really, with the Bears. Last year, he averaged 9 points a game and 3 rebounds. And I can already hear the people in the comments. Seriously, we're hyping up a guy who can't even score double figures. And I will say this. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Because I think this kid could be a real good player for what Baylor is going to look for on offense. And I think this could be a great next step for him. Because you look at that and you think, well, there's not much there. 9 points on a bad team. What are you getting so excited about? Well, then you look at numbers and I see 3-point percentage, because that's the first thing I'm looking at. Bill Peterson talked with us on ESPN Central Texas last week. He said the main thing Baylor needs to replace, even more so than the starting center position, is a big guy who can shoot the three. That's such an important part of their offense. So I look at the 3-point percentage and, oh boy, yeah. Celestine shot 44% from three last year. 44% from three. He's a career 40% shooter from three. I am taking that 11 times out of 10. And he is more of a spot-up guy. He's not one who is going to be penetrating every time down. He's not going to knife through defenders a lot, although there is something there that I will talk about later. He's a spot-up shooter. In fact, he was in the 91st or 95th percentile in all of college basketball of spot-up shooting. He takes a lot of shots out there. He makes a lot of shots out there. Sweet little lefty stroke. And when you hear about a Jalen Bridges replacement and you hear that it's a wing, the kind of guy body-wise that you are thinking of is probably not what Jalen Celestine is. He's big, man. Like, he's not, Jalen Bridges is tall and he's lanky and he has a good wingspan, but I wouldn't say, broad-shouldered, strongest guy on the team. Pretty strong guy, but Celestine is solid, man. Like, it is not. In fact, I know you've probably watched the Norchad O'Meara highlights by now. The body type is not that far off for Jalen Celestine. He's really not. 6'7" and 215, and that seems even like a bit of an undersell with how strong this guy is. And so because of that, when I look at his highlights, I think this could be a guy that can get to the basket. Not a big dribble handoff guy, not someone who's living in the paint, but I think with his skill set, I don't see any reason why he can't be. That said, there are some lethal scorers that we think on this team, and there's going to be a lot of sharing the rock. And for a 6'6", 6'7" wing, there's going to be a lot of room. Baylor's going to space the floor very well. I think they've got two guys who they think at any given time, but mostly one of these guys on the court, but you could potentially have Ojamuna and Omir out there as your guys who are handling the middle, and everyone else spread it out. And this is a guy in Jalen Celestine who can absolutely do that. Now, I mentioned he does have a medical red shirt in the middle there. He did have knee surgery before his junior season, came back for his senior season, played 27 games, started 23. So I don't think that the injury necessarily is an issue. But what I do think is a good part out of it is I think that means 2 years of eligibility left. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he would get a COVID year, or if not a grad year, plus that medical red shirt. So he comes in as having been in a program. You might actually get him for 2 years, which is not the case, obviously, for Omir, nor for 1 year. And that's going to be it. But this could potentially be a guy that you bring back for a second year. So I talked about it earlier this week with Omir, that there were still dominoes left to fall here. And this seems like one of them. I don't know if that means Baylor's done after this. I don't know. They've got room, but I don't know if that means they're going to be bringing in a power 5 guy after this. Probably someone who's more of a depth guy that they can work on a little bit and have for a few more years. But Jalen Celestine, I might have to sell it to you guys, because you're going to look at the numbers and say, what are we doing? But I think this is a good piece. All Big 12, no. But this is a good talent to kind of round out your lineup. And in fact, I would go as far as saying, the numbers from what he put up last year in his quote unquote senior season at Cal is not all that much different from, even someone like a Jalen Bridges when he came in here. Younger, Bridges was younger, but you didn't know exactly what you were getting from this West Virginia kid. He was averaging 8 points a game in his final year at West Virginia, less than 1 assist a game, only a little less than 5 rebounds a game. So not that much different from what you were seeing. And by the way, his offensive game changed. He became a better shooter, and a guy who in the second half of 23 was just a shooter, to what we saw the last couple months of his senior season. I'm talking about Bridges here, where he was a true inside-out scorer to the point where he's going to be an NBA guy doing that. So Jalen Celestine, remember the name, could be on campus right now as you're listening to this, and would be, I think, a very nice rotational piece, potential starter, depending on how you see this lineup, for the Bears to kind of round out things. Maybe one more guy to round out that rotation. So I, for one, am in on this kid from Cal. But first, I got to tell you about our great sponsor of today's show, and that is, of course, Yahoo Finance. It's really the only place that you need to be going. For more than 25 years, it has been the brand behind every great investor. So whether you're a seasoned investor or you're just looking for a little extra guidance, just getting into it like me, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data that you need, and they do it in one place. Okay, they are the number one financial destination. It produces a holistic look. They're giving you everything from the news cycle, breaking news, to editorials, analyst ratings, independent research, so much more. Whatever you're looking for, they're going to give you the data for it. And you can link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including a 401k and other investments too. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures that you are set apart from the rest of those investors and get that insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. So for that comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, your number one financial destination. Again, one more time, that's yahoofinance.com. Over to the football side of things. Speaking of Matt Mosley, who I mentioned in the last segment, we had Matt Mosley of ESPN Central Texas, weekdays 3 to 6, on a show a few weeks ago, breaking down the spring finale, the final spring practice for Baylor football of the season. And one of the things we got into was that quarterback battle, which we have not heard who the winner is or who the upper hand is, who has the upper hand, I should say, in that battle yet. And this we probably won't hear until a few weeks or maybe even a few days before game number one. Now, I think a lot of us, including myself, think it is going to be DeQuan Finn, the transfer from Toledo, MAC Player of the Year. You bring this guy in with an eye towards being the starter. And in that episode, after the spring finale, Matt brought up an interesting comparison on who Finn kind of reminds him of.
The name I kept kind of hearing is Boykin from 2014.
Hey, now I was wondering about this. Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, and
it seemed like a decent enough analogy or comparison, I should say, with the arm strength and all of that.
Extremely elusive. The arm strength is fine, and again, that guy was like in the Heisman running that year. Okay, so I don't want to go overboard, but I saw enough and I heard enough.
And man, if DeQuan Finn turns into half the player Trevone Boykin was in 2014, we're in for a treat, okay? Because Matt kind of mentions it there, but I think it gets forgotten because it was 10 years ago. But Trevon Boykin had legitimate Heisman hype, finished top 10 in the Heisman Trophy voting his last 2 years, including, I think, 5th or 4th in that 2014 season. Like, he was very close to being invited to New York. Terrific talent, right? I had some off the field issues that I hope doesn't happen to DeQuan Finn, but in terms of the player profile, it's not far off. Boykin, it was a guy who, didn't have the prettiest deep ball in the world, but completed a lot of deep passes. Wasn't the most, mechanically, fundamentally sound quarterback in the world, but got the job done a lot. Wasn't known as like this ultimate runner, but could get out of the pocket and elude with the best of them. And I think that's the first thing we kind of look at in terms of this comparison, the elusiveness. DeQuan Finn, he's not a running quarterback. He is a quarterback who can run. And Trevone Boykin is the same way. These guys are not doing a lot of design runs like you saw with Gary Bohannon, but they can scramble. They can get out of the pocket the way that, Gary Bohannon didn't necessarily do, nor most Baylor quarterbacks were able to do. Not a lot of them, because the last decade and a half, because of that Briles offense, wasn't, escaping the pocket a lot. They were first read, found their guy. And I know what you're thinking. Well, Cam, we're supposed to be running that offense this year. What does it matter if a quarterback can get outside of the pocket? I'll tell you why. Because this is a big adjustment. This is year one of running this offense again. And we've talked about how much of a struggle that can be for the offensive line. So it might not be the first read kind of offense that we saw in the Briles days, because they might not have time to do that. And the receivers might not be on the same page early in the season. So you need a guy who you really need to account for. And I would honestly go as far as saying Baylor has not had a great scrambler. Well, Charlie Brewer at his peak was a very good scrambler. I'll give him that. But really since RG3, and I'm not saying DeQuan Finn's going to be that, but he is the first one in a while that you really need to account for, and what he can do outside of the pocket. The first quarterback, I would say, since I guess Charlie Brewer, but maybe all the way back to RG3, that you really need a spy on the defense to shadow whatever way Finn is looking, because he could run at the drop of a hat and really burn you the way Trevone Boykin could. And you watch the tape, and I tell you, man, the way they're delivering that deep ball, it is pretty similar. These are guys who don't have the strongest arms in the world, but can get down there because they're using their whole body to get into it. And I'm telling you, I see it on the tape. I'm no football coach, but I can see kind of mirrored fundamentals. They throw the ball very similarly. And honestly, I think the offense that Boykin was in and the offense that Finn is going to be in this year, I think are going to be very similar. Because that Sonny Cumbie, I think Doug Meacham there too, that 2014 TCU team, they ran a pretty elite offense. Like Baylor was great and TCU was right there with them in terms of those offensive rankings. It wasn't exactly the same, but I mean, Boykin could chuck that thing, man. They threw it deep a lot. They established the run the same way that you would see in this style of offense. So I can see where a lot of coaches who were telling Matt this could see those similarities. And I think it should be noted that there is a coach on this Baylor staff who knows that 2014 Trevone Boykin season pretty intimately. In fact, there are two coaches on the staff that know it. You also got your tight ends coach who was with Gary Patterson for years at TCU, who was obviously the head man when Boykin was leading them to, BCS bowl appearances because of his heroics. So if you're getting a quarterback that is reminding people of Trevon Boykin in college, that is a really good sign. A really good sign. Does that mean Baylor's going to go 11-1 and DeQuan Finn is going to finish fifth in the Heisman Trophy voting? Yes, that's exactly what it means. Bet it. Put the house on it right now. That is exactly what it means. No. I mean, I think this, again, if you can get half or 75% of a Trevon Boykin 2014 season from your quarterback, Baylor's in a really good spot. And by that, I mean bowl game. Because for all that I've waxed poetic about for this Baylor offseason, and I will continue to do because I've loved the moves, it doesn't mean they're going 10-2. It means it makes me feel better about going to a bowl game, which going from 3 to 6 wins, potentially 7 wins, that's a nice jump. Doubling your win total, that's a good jump. I know 3 is a small number to start at. Trust me, I get it. But moving up that much would be a nice little jump. But I could see the comparisons here. And by the way, and I've said this before, and I'll probably say it again, but I think there's legit comps for Sawyer Robertson in terms of his skill set for some other great Baylor quarterbacks. Seth Russell, I think, is skill set wise, I think that's a fair comparison in terms of, big, tall, kind of traditional quarterback, good, sneaky, good athletes in terms of how they can run and the timing, deep ball routes they're pretty good at. And I don't think Sawyer Robertson, Seth Russell, that would be great. But in terms of the skill set, I can absolutely see that being there. But if you had to ask me yesterday, today, or tomorrow, I'm going to tell you DeQuan Finn is going to be the starting quarterback on this team. And to get a Trevone Boykin comparison is big time for this team, for this program going forward. And yes, definitely for this coaching staff going forward. So all that to say, I also love that he's teaming up with someone like Jake Spavital. Again, the work he's done with quarterbacks has been incredible over his tenure. And you look at the guys he's worked with, Johnny Manziel, Kyler Murray, even a Davis Webb, who you're like, why are we bragging on him? You look at the numbers, that's a pretty good college quarterback and a guy who's, I think, still making a living in the pros off it. So to bring in as someone as exciting as the MAC Player of the Year, DeQuan Finn, and we team him up with Jake Spavital, that could be a recipe for a very promising offensive season. Now, of course, there are still holes with this team, but I love this comparison. And if Baylor can get anything like what TCU got out of Trevone Boykin in 2014, that is going to be a good deal for our Bears. Another great deal is what's going on at FanDuel right now. Yeah, you know it as America's number one sports book. I know it as that too, but I also know it as a proud sponsor of today's Locked On Baylor because it's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL. And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win for yourself. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 for your spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon, LOCKEDON, to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, of course that is, America's number one sportsbook. And of course, there's been all kinds of talks in this offseason about splitting up college football. We've not heard the end of it yet. We're far from it. They talked about the Super League, the Super Division One, whatever they called it, and that had some flaws in that plan, which will not get passed until you get the Big Ten on board, which they don't. So that and how it looks now is not going to get passed. But as I said, there are some good points in there, and we all know what we're heading towards as college football fans. There is going to be a day, probably pretty soon, where the group of four, or excuse me, the power four versus the group of five, whatever you call it, are going to be two different divisions, basically. There's going to be two different champions. And it could even get to the point where it's obviously the power two are having their own championship. We could be near that point. And I love this article by Mike Craven of Dave Campbell's Texas Football. He does a great job covering all the teams in Texas. And he asked some coaches about this, both Power 4 and Group of 5 coaches. And I think this is a good quote from Sonny Dykes of TCU. Getting a little TCU happy in this episode. Quote, "There's going to be a split between Power 4 and G5 eventually. There's such a big difference right now between the haves and the have-nots, and I think we'll eventually split into two separate divisions. Alabama and Louisiana Tech aren't playing the same sport." He's right. He's right. By the way, he used to coach Louisiana Tech. He knows that. He's right. And honestly, you look at it from a Group of 5 perspective, and I know a lot of Group of 5 fans will push back on this, but they should have, at this point, their own championship, because even the Power 4 is getting so diluted by how much power is in the top two, the Big Ten and the SEC. And so if you're a team like a Louisiana Tech or a Texas State or a Rice or even, a SMU a few months ago, why wouldn't you want that? Because I think it's the UNT coach says in here later, like, why are we going across the country to play East Carolina and we're not playing Rice or we're not playing UTEP when they're really on our level? Like, if you have this new playoff structure where you're going to have a couple of 5 teams, it's like, why even go through that? Because once a decade you might win a game in the college football playoff. Like, why? In fact, Rhett Lashley of SMU puts it in a good terms, which might resonate with some Big 12 fans. Would you rather go get beat 48-7 to Georgia in the first round or play for a championship? Some say that makes it FCS football, but FCS football thrives for what it is. What saves Group of 5 football is competition. And that's right, man. Like, he's right. And it's like, would you rather have a 0.01% chance every couple of years realistically at the national championship, or make your own national championship that feels real and have a real chance at it every year? It just that makes sense to me. Now, from a Baylor standpoint, we're looking at a team that is in the Power 4 that would be playing for the quote unquote the real national championship. But I'm thinking 10, 15 years down the line, not saying Baylor's going to drop down to an FCS level or anything like that, but at some point, if you are a Baylor or a TCU or Stanford or more realistically a Vanderbilt, and you aren't competing for a stretch on the football field and, behind the scenes and NIL and stuff, you're not competing for a long time. What does that look like? Is it like, man, maybe we should have one of these Group of 5 championships? Is that what we eventually get to? I hope not, and I don't think so, but it is an issue that every college football program needs to look at and that fans need to look at. Because, realistically, a year or two ago, Baylor in the current structure doesn't have a great shot at winning the national championship anyway. That's what made the TCU run to the championship game so miraculous, because it's not built for schools like us. Now, we still love college football because we love beating rivals. We love conference championships. We take a lot of pride in things like winning the Sugar Bowl. That stuff means a lot to us. So why can't group of 5 teams also take solace in that and have fun with that? You know what I'm saying? Like it's just on a different level. Group of 5 teams are talking about having their own national championships. They have something to compete for. Whereas right now, a school like Baylor or a Stanford are competing for a conference championship and a New Year's Six bowl victory. That means a lot to us. When you look at the SEC or the Big Ten, it doesn't mean anything to them anymore. So that's why I say every college football program and their fans need to look at what is going on with this. How do we make Division I FBS college football into a world where it is competitive in its own way for everyone involved? Anyway, I think that's the direction we're headed, probably sooner rather than later. I know that's not a hot take. Let me know what you think about that down in the comments below. What do you think about the Trevone Boykin comparison there? I think it's pretty good and will be very good for Baylor. And how do you think Baylor rounds out the starting lineup in basketball? Drop that down in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe. Tell your friends. We drop an episode every day on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. We will see you tomorrow on Locked On Baylor.